Welcome to the Innovator Spotlight, a podcast featuring conversations with some of the most innovative leaders, designers, and technologists in biomedical engineering and the health sciences. I'm Sean Grace, and today's guest is Mr. Matt Parsons, Senior Director of Emerging Technologies at Johnson & Johnson. Matt has over 20 years of experience in medical device development, with roles including strategy and product development, strategic marketing, front-end innovation, and talent development. Matt obtained both his bachelor's and master's of science degrees in biomedical engineering from Tulane University. He holds over a dozen patents ranging from disposable devices and implants to surgical predictive analytics solutions. Most recently, Matt joined a cross-sector initiative combining farm, med devices, and consumer solutions focused on the prevention, interception, and cure of lung cancer. Matt is also an avid runner and also enjoys building tree houses. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you. So, you like building tree houses. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it was kind of an idea of having a tree house for a long time, and with two young kids, we thought I'd better get it done before they get so old that they won't enjoy it anymore. And so I spent quite a bit of last summer building a tree house, so it worked out pretty well.
Nice. And how old are your kids?
They're 8 and 12.
Boy, girl?
One of each, yeah. So the girl's older and the boy's the younger one.
Very nice. And they both enjoy the tree house equally?
I think probably I enjoy it more, but yeah, they get some good use out of it. So
nice. So it all works out.
Yeah.
So you have a really interesting career path, and I'd read a quote somewhere that you had stated. You said, "quote unquote," "I believe in Stephen Johnson's theory of slow hunches and think diverse connections foster great innovation." What do you mean by that?
Oh, it's a great TED Talk by Stephen Johnson. I think he's written some books on it too. But the basic idea of the slow hunch is that this idea that innovation sort of builds slowly over time, and it's not necessarily this instantaneous eureka moment as much as people thinking about things and trying it. And I think in his talk he gives a great example of the invention of GPS, and so it's a perfect example of that if you listen to it. But you see that in work a lot, where just getting diverse input, getting interesting perspectives. I think in my career, one of the most interesting was hiring a former veterinarian on my team when I was in strategic marketing. She had managed a transgenic goat herd for Genzyme, actually, and so not exactly the normal strategic marketing candidate that you would look for. But I just loved that in every interview question, she had really creative answers and thought of every challenge that I could throw her way. She just thought of it completely differently than I would have, and I loved that it forced me to think differently and just brought a great perspective to the team.
Yeah, it brings to mind a great book that I had read when it came out probably about a year ago called Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not. Sounds interesting.
He posits in this book that generalists tend to foster more innovation than specialists. Specialization works very well in what he calls kind environments, but the world is typically not a world of kind environments. It's typically a world of wicked environments with wicked problems, which require out-of-the-box innovative approaches. He concludes that it's the generalist who actually brings more diverse perspectives to problem solving. What do you think about that?
Yeah, what came to mind as you were describing it, it sounds like a really interesting book. And the idea of, I'll probably get the quote not exactly right, but the Darwin quote that I always think of in this situation is, it's not the strongest or the fastest that survive, it's those best able to adapt to change.
Right.
And so that idea of the generalist, right, a diverse experience set and the ability to look at problems from different angles. And also I think the idea of saying, I'm probably not the world's expert, and I'm going to tap into some of those experts, which is something I think we're really fortunate to be able to do in Johnson & Johnson with such a huge company. And certainly in the lung cancer initiative, it's a big part of what we do is tapping into additional experts to make sure that we get the right subject matter experts involved, get the best possible information available, and then take our best shot. So yeah, it's a really interesting idea.
So tell me more about the lung cancer initiative and your role as Senior Director of Emerging Technologies.
Yeah, sure. So the lung cancer initiative is a really interesting part of Johnson and Johnson. And if you look at in the past, where I think there's been some criticism leveled at Alex and at J&J, sometimes by the street, which says, break up the sectors, meaning consumer and pharmaceuticals and medical devices. Break those up. They don't really benefit each other. There's no sense having them together, and they just drag each other down.
Right.
And Alex has always resisted and said, no, there's tremendous value in having all these capabilities together under one roof. The Lung Cancer Initiative, I think, is a very tangible, clear example of that. And it has received sort of tremendous support and also has great momentum based on some of the achievements over the last year. So it's a relatively young part of the organization. It's officially existed a little over, I guess, a couple years now. And it has become its own legal entity. So it has its own sort of governance and budget and processes. That being said, it's also part of its success is that it depends very much on close collaboration and connections with those three sectors. So we have partners in consumer and medical device and pharmaceuticals. And the idea really is how do we bring the best of those capabilities to tackle the challenge that is lung cancer, which is the number one cancer killer in the world. And it is also has a pretty abysmal survival rate. A 5-year survival rate is less than 20%. And
Hmm.
so, generally that's because it's discovered too late. When by the time you become symptomatic with lung cancer, your chances of survival are probably, at least in stage 4, probably below 5%.
Wow.
So really, when you look at that and think about what can we do, there's this tremendous effort across a variety of different disciplines to be able to say, how do we engage patients and their physicians to enable earlier detection and treatment? How do we drive policy change to enable more people to get screened in the first place? How do we bring medical devices into the equation so such that you can have less invasive and less morbidity procedures to get a better and more definitive diagnosis? There's digital capabilities that come into play, whether that's through smoking cessation programs or through image analytics to enable more confident diagnostic. And then ultimately, the big acquisition that we had with Auris to drive robotic bronchoscopy into the equation, as well as ultimately local drug delivery, which is one of the huge goals of LCI to enable that to give you lower chances of recurrence as well as less systemic toxicity. So a really interesting package of all the fun stuff you can think of across all the different businesses. It all comes together in LCI. So I feel really fortunate to be part of that team.
Very interesting. Very cool. So, how would you describe a day in the life for Matt Parsons? Now, granted, we're in very strange times right now, so I'm sure a day in the life today is very different than a day in the life back in January for you. But if you could just sort of describe for our listeners what a typical day in the life as it applies to your job as senior director of emerging technologies would be.
Yeah, sure. So I guess aside from the obvious, like everyone spending way too much time on Zoom, it's
Right.
typically I would say my job is it's sort of an interesting combination of a little bit of development, a little bit of BD, like business development, and a lot of external partnerships, and then kind of those all wrapped together plus some marketing, and a lot of that is because the lung cancer initiative is a pretty small team, and so the idea that, for example, we say, okay, look, there's an unmet need here, and it's around, for example, of the eligible patients to get a CT screen, basically, which is sort of the first test to be able to tell, do you have a lesion in your lung that we should biopsy? Um, it's roughly 95% of the eligible patients do not get screened, and so
Wow.
part of the challenge was, well, what's driving this? Are they just not able to get to a CT scanner or not able to get to a hospital? Are they just unaware that they're at risk? Is their primary care physician just not having the conversation and telling them that they're eligible? Um, there's so many different things that factor in, and so part of that was sort of this market research to say, let's figure out what the barriers to adoption are. So that was almost more of a marketing role in that case. Another piece was, let's do a landscape assessment to figure out what are the technologies out there that might be able to help. And so you start to look at some strategic elements and some technology elements of what can we do near term versus what might be long term and more transformational. And then ultimately you get into sort of more of a BD kind of role where it's, how do we get to a point where we engage some of these potential partners, maybe run some pilot tests with them, maybe do some clinical trials or preclinical work, and then ultimately see what works best, and decide whether or not we want to acquire the technology or somehow partner with them to bring this to patients. So a lot of those different pieces come together, which to me is really fun.
Now, you've also had a fair amount of experience as a mentor and working with talent development over your career. I'd like to talk a little about your perspectives of the role of the mentors and mentorship, and how important that is for an early in career employee who is navigating the world of Johnson and Johnson, which is a rather large organization. Just give us a little bit of your perspective on mentorship.
Yeah. Well, I guess I tend to look at it as, I guess, two things. One, it's a service, and the other piece is that it's an opportunity to learn, and which maybe is sort of the reverse of maybe what some people think of when they think of mentorship. And so to me, the easy part is being able to offer up, here's what I've learned from my experience, and maybe it's useful to you. And so being able to share that, I think, is sort of the simple side of it. The other side of it, I think, is just being able to help a person think through the challenges and what their options might be. And it could be anything. It could be, in fact, there was a recent conversation with one of the LDPs about where should I go? Like thinking about right
Mhm.
now, I left the city where my job was to come stay with my parents during this COVID challenge, and now I could maybe temporarily go back to that city to finish up some work, but I'm in this rotational program, and I may have to move shortly after that. And so just helping them think through, where that might go and what are the pros and cons. And sometimes it's just nice to be able to bounce ideas off of people, and even if I don't have an answer. But I guess what I always find is that through those conversations and through listening to them and helping them think through, I'm always learning. And that's the part really that I value a lot. Is I feel like as a mentor, I sort of get free learning, right? And I get free diverse
Mhm.
perspective just hearing from different people.
Right. No, that makes sense. Certainly, I've always been a big believer that the teacher often learns more than the student,
Yeah.
in much of that experience. But as far as matching, like if you were new to J&J and you were seeking a mentor, what are some of the things that, because I would think that certain fits are better than others, right? So based on personality and based on experience, uh, what kind of roadmap would you put together for someone who's trying to find the right mentor?
Yeah, so I guess part of it is thinking through their desire, that the desired goals of that person. Where is it that they want to be? And oftentimes, I think earlier in your career, sometimes people are just absolutely laser focused. They know exactly what they want to do, and then that's relatively easy, right? You sort of pick people that have been along that similar path or that are in that desired future position you have, and be able to approach them and talk to them and learn about how they got there. Um, the other, though, I think, is just to be able to acknowledge sometimes you just don't know, and or maybe you're just really open to three different things. One of the folks that I've mentored in the past, he literally had, I think it was like five things. He had five potential positions that he could see himself landing in within the
Uh,
next, let's say, 3 to 5 years. And so we just kind of talked through mapping that out as, is there a ceiling in any one of those? Does any one of those limit your future options beyond that? Who are the people that you're already connected to in your network that can give you perspective on each of those options? And who are the people you're not connected with that I might be able to help connect you to, or someone else in your network might be able to help connect you to? So I think a lot of it has to do with mapping out either capability gaps that you have, or just sort of thinking through your desired future position and who else may already be in that seat.
Gotcha. Speaking of networking, I mean, networking in the age of COVID is a little different. Considering that there aren't the conferences. I don't even think CES. Well, CES did happen this year because it was in January. Whether it happens next January, I don't know. But certainly, some of the big trade shows, some of the big conferences are not happening, as well as just thousands of smaller conferences where typically you would meet people, you would create connections, you would build your network from just that in-person encounter. What are some of your perspectives on as a young, early in development engineer, as an example, looking to expand their network, looking to do what they need to do to make those connections without the advantage of actually being out and about?
Yeah, that's really hard, actually.
Yeah.
Um, I guess I guess a couple of things come to mind, and part of it is if you're more outgoing, then you tend to really benefit from those spontaneous face-to-face kind of interactions that you get, like whether that's at a society meeting or a conference or whatever. And even with teams that you work with. I know in a couple years back on one of the projects I was working on, there was a software development team in Germany, and the first few conference calls were fine. They were very cordial and respectful, and but it was just never going to move until I flew out there and I sat with them for a week and met with them, and we talked through their challenges and what I could do to help and what they could do to help my projects. And it completely transformed after that. And then a couple more trips, being able to spend time with them and just develop that relationship really mattered. And in this world, it's so much harder actually to be able
Mm.
to do that. Um, However, I guess if you're less of sort of that spontaneous interpersonal interaction type and you're more of a planner, which I think oftentimes engineers are, then it actually may be to your advantage to think through. It's not unlike sort of that mentor selection conversation. It's really thinking
Hmm.
about who might be beneficial to have in your network. Um, who do you need to help influence stakeholders, either to get your projects done or to help with your career advancement or just to learn from? And when you think about that sort of branching network of potential stakeholders and people that you need to connect with, I think that can be really helpful. As who influences the influencers, and thinking through that, and then being very deliberate about, okay, I'm going to set up a Zoom introduction call with this one. I'm going to learn about their career and maybe tell them a little bit about me. And it's hard, right, to do that over Zoom, but I've found, I've sort of been dedicated to making sure I use my camera as much as possible in these meetings.
Right.
So there's some kind of, face-to-face interaction. And I think that's maybe the best we can do now.
Right. And you bring up a good point. Certainly, I'm on a fair amount of Zoom calls, and there are certain people who just don't want to use the camera. And now, granted, a lot of the Zoom calls that I'm on, I'm familiar with the team, so it matters not much to me. But I certainly try to use the camera just to create that additional connection visually.
That's right. You made me think of another example where I think, I guess a couple of things. One was having a team in one of my past roles. I had a team in the U.S. and I had a team in Switzerland. And the Swiss team, every meeting we would have, they would put a camera in the room, in their conference room, right? So there'd be like six of them sitting around a table, and there'd be a camera in there, and especially on like a WebEx or Zoom now, I guess, or whatever it is. But it was like it wasn't like you had great resolution, right? You could sort of vaguely tell there were some people sitting in the room, but there it wasn't like you had great nonverbal communication. Um, but I learned from them like the value of that, because they didn't have a manager sitting in their office in Switzerland. And so for them just to have that visual connection, in our weekly meetings really mattered. And not just with me as their manager, but for them to be able to see the rest of the team and interact and wave to them. It sounds so simple, but it went a lot further than just sort of a faceless voice call. So it really mattered to them a lot. And I guess I learned from that, well before this COVID stuff, that visual connection when you aren't able to be there face to face can be pretty impactful.
Right. Want to switch gears for a moment and talk about maybe some of the nonprofit and humanitarian work that you may have been involved with throughout your career. Can you give any examples of some of the projects that you've been involved with and what they've meant to you? And
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think my ability to contribute to those has been pretty dramatically enhanced by Johnson and Johnson. I'll actually give the company a lot of credit there, because they have a 2-to-1 gift matching program, which to me is just astounding, right? That every
wow,
dollar I give, they're going to give $2.
right, wow,
And so that in a way has made it really amazing that you can have a really substantial impact on sort of charitable contributions. But going beyond just sort of the dollar contribution, I've been involved in the Jimmy Fund Walk. So basically fundraiser for Dana Farber, for probably, God, let's see, I think maybe almost 20 years now. Um, And so, it all started with a mentor of mine, actually, at my first medical device job, and he had three sons, and his middle son died when he was 14, and
Mm.
was treated at Dana-Farber, and his youngest son, a few years later, had convinced him, Dad, we're going to do this walk together, and it's a walk along the Boston Marathon route, and it's you can choose to do different levels. It's a 26-mile walk if you want to do it, or you can do the half marathon, or you can do like a 10K walk.
Uh-huh.
But either way, every mile is marked by an image of a patient who's receiving care at Dana-Farber.
Wow.
And so it's just this really interesting community of folks that come together every year to do this, and in support of my friend and mentor, which was really cool. And he eventually lost another family member from cancer, and then and over the years, I guess it's probably goes without saying that all of us are going to know someone or be affected by cancer, probably in our lifetime, and eventually having a parent and a sister that have both survived but have been affected by cancer, and just realizing that this isn't really optional. This is part of everyone's life, and it doesn't care about COVID, and it's something that is going to be around for a while. And so really feeling good about having contributed to that organization many times over the years, and also with the benefit of the gift matching from Johnson & Johnson, plus now being part of the lung cancer initiative, it's sort of come full circle.
Do you feel that your efforts within the walk or any other efforts helps inform you as a professional in your career in healthcare?
Yeah, I actually do. I mean, I think, I guess, a couple of things. One is sort of never losing that perspective. That I think about my friend and mentor who sort of got me involved in it to begin with. For him, it completely changed his career. He was kind of the smartest guy in the room. Whenever a project was going wrong, he was the guy they called in and he fixed it. He was unstoppable in terms of, as an engineer who could fix problems. He was advancing fast in the organization. And when I started with the company, his son had already passed away, and folks told me he's never been the same. He's never been the same. He's never going to recover. And his
Mhm.
career took a completely different track there. And in some ways, I thought that's really sad. He could easily be the head of operations or the head of R&D, or any number of those sort of executive roles, but he's not, and he's just sort of content staying where he is. And I guess over time, I completely changed that perspective, which was he's actually right where he should be, because
Hmm.
he knows the importance of balancing his work with his family, and he knows that he's incredibly valuable as a mentor. He mentored everybody that came in as young engineers there. Nobody asked him to do it; he just did it, and he was really good at it. And he's a phenomenal teacher. Um, and so, it changed my perspective to thinking about it's really not about like how fast and far can I advance. At least, maybe earlier in the career that was sort of my target, but it's much more about, do I like the people I work with, and do I feel like I'm solving a really important problem? And that's sort of how my career has shaped, since then.
Hmm. Beautiful. Um, and finally, I'd like to ask you, Matt, what do you know now that you wish you knew then at the start of your career?
That's an interesting one, I guess. Let's see. I don't want to be redundant, I guess, but I'm sort of thinking very similarly to what we just talked about, which for me is, I think early in my career, I constantly wanted to challenge myself. I guess that part still lives in me. Doing doing 100-mile bike rides and stuff like that is like, I need to challenge myself.
Right.
Um, but but in the career, it was about, I remember Ian Burgess, right? And Ian Burgess is just a great guy, an excellent leader. He was the head of R&D in spine when I started in the spine organization in Johnson and Johnson, and I was like, I want to be Ian, and I wasn't shy about it. Like when he would ask me, like, where do you want to be eventually? I'm like, I want to be you. Like I want to I want to be in your role.
Mhm.
And so it's sort of aggressive about, give me more responsibility, give me tougher projects. I'll take on whatever. And I still kind of thrive on some of that stuff, the challenging stuff. But at the same time, sort of where I've arrived, I think eventually is, um, it's less about that for me, and it's more about, am I in a place where I've got a great team that I'm working with? I'm learning a ton, which I absolutely am in the lung cancer initiative, and I'm being challenged in a variety of ways, whether that's learning new things or trying to come up with better solutions for patients. or even just finding better ways for the organization to deliver those solutions. Those are all the things that sort of keep me excited about coming to work every day.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate the time, and it was good to talk to you again.
The Innovator Spotlight podcast is brought to you by Johnson & Johnson's R&D Leadership Development Program, cultivating tomorrow's innovation leaders in medical engineering and technologies. I'm Sean Grace. Thanks so much for listening.